Hello and welcome to the lesson on using vectors and matrices in Swift Calcs. Swift Calcs supports a wide range of functions using vectors or matrices. A vector is a 1D list of numbers, while a matrix is a 2D table of numbers. To create a vector or matrix in Swift Calcs, you can directly enter the vector or matrix using math mode. When entering a value, you use the brackets to create a vector, and the comma key to create or skip to the next column. Use the semicolon key to add a new row. When working in a matrix you've already created, you can add columns by pressing the comma key at the start of a column, which will insert a new column just before the current one. You can similarly create new rows by pressing the semicolon key. Use the arrow keys to move around the matrix. Rows and columns can be deleted with the shift key. For example, shift semicolon, which is the colon key, will remove rows, while shift comma, which is the less than sign, will remove columns. You can also use the options in the toolbar to add or remove columns and rows. The other way to create a matrix in Swift Calcs is to use the Create Matrix tool in the toolbox. The keyboard shortcut for this is by typing matrix space in math mode. The matrix tool allows you to define the number of rows and columns you wish to create for your matrix, as well as a function that defines the values that will be used for each element in your matrix. For example, let's create a 4x5 matrix where each element is equal to the row number plus the column number divided by 10. I'll add a decimal point after the 10 to change this to approximate mode, and we can now see that the value of each element is set based on its position in the matrix. Note that this worksheet is 0 indexed, which means rows and columns are numbered starting from 0. If we instead want to use 1-based indexing, we can click on the worksheet settings and change it there, from first row column is numbered 0 to first row column is numbered 1. When we save and recalculate, you'll see our matrix is updated with the first row and column based on a value of 1. Let's set this matrix equal to b. Once we have created a matrix, we can use any function with the matrix as we would normally with a number, and the function will be applied to each item in the matrix. For example, cosine of b will give me the cosine of all values in my matrix. We can also add a value to all numbers in a matrix, or we can multiply everything in the matrix by a certain number. When using multiplication, division, or exponentials, Swift Calcs assumes that you're acting on these items as matrices. For example, b times c returns the matrix multiplication of b and c. In this case I get an error because the matrix multiplication requires that the number of columns in the first item, b, equals the number of rows in the second, c, which is not the case here. If I instead want to multiply each element in b by the associated element in c, I need to use element-wise multiplication. You can find this in the command library, under Matrices and Lists, Element-Wise Math. However, the keyboard shortcut is to use a decimal point before the multiplication sign. The multiplication sign will be transformed into a circle with a dot in it, which is Swift Calcs' representation for element-wise multiplication, and the result will be the element-wise multiplication of each item in each matrix. The same behavior occurs for exponentials and division. For example, b squared is equivalent to the b matrix multiplied by itself with matrix multiplication. If I wanted the element-wise exponential, I would use dot exponential, which again places the element-wise operator before the exponential, squared. This returns the square of each element in the matrix B. Swift Calcs has a number of functions built in that you can use with matrices and vectors, which are available in the command library under the Matrices and Lists area. They include cross products, dot products, determinants, eigenvalues, eigenvectors, and more. We can also work with subportions of a vector or a matrix. To access a particular value in a matrix, after typing the variable name for our matrix, we use the brackets key to get the assessor, and then enter the row and column number we would like returned. For vectors, we would simply enter one value instead of two. Remember, your worksheet may be 1 indexed or 0 indexed, so the first row may be 0, 0, or the first row and column may be 1, 1, depending on your worksheet settings. We can also set portions of a matrix this way. For example, we can set the second row, third column of matrix B equal to 24. We aren't limited to returning single values from a matrix. We can use the interval command, which is 2 periods together, to access a larger portion of a matrix. We can leave the start or the end of the interval blank to access from the start or end of the matrix. Again, we can set portions of a matrix this way. The interval command can also be used to create vectors with elements of increasing value. For example, 1 ... to create the interval command 10 will create the vector 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 4 ... 20 will create 4 upwards to 20. If we want to create an interval with different spacing, we can use the comma key. For example, 1, 3 all the way to 11 will create the vector 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. Swift Calcs will look at the first two items, 1 and 3, determine the spacing is 2, and apply that to the remainder of the items. 1, 5, ... for interval, will have a spacing of 4, up to 40. All of this behavior is documented in an example worksheet using matrices that is available in the Swift Calcs help area. Check this out for more examples and information. Join us in our next lesson, where we will discuss importing data into Swift Calcs.